There are places in the American South where the air still remembers, where the trees lean a little closer, as if listening for names that no one's dared to speak in generations. And if you stand long enough on a quiet Virginia road, you can still hear the whisper of the Beaumonts, the family whose wealth was built on lies and whose blood ran thicker than anyone ever knew. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The story of the Beaumont family isn't taught in any school. It doesn't appear in the official archives, though if you go deep enough into the courthouse basement in Caroline County, there's a ledger, its pages warped with age, that tells of a man who sold not only his land and livestock, but his daughters. His name was Elijah Beaumont, a tobacco magnate and a man of enormous pride. To his neighbours he was a visionary, the kind of southerner who rebuilt after the Civil War when others fell into ruin. But beneath his charm lay something much darker. Elijah believed his fortune was blessed by blood, his blood, and he swore that no outsider, no banker, no stranger, no husband, would ever own what he created. So he made an arrangement. When his daughters came of age, he didn't marry them off for love. He sold them, as wives, to his own business partners, binding their bodies to the family empire as if they were deeds of property. The marriages were secret, carried out in the parlour of Beaumont Hall, witnessed only by the family and the priest he kept on payroll. At first, the neighbours whispered, then they stopped, because soon after, anyone who questioned the Beaumonts either left town or vanished. By the time Elijah's youngest daughter, Clara, disappeared in the Somme, Mere of 1835, even the sheriff refused to go near the property. The Beaumonts had become something like a myth, the kind people warned their children about but never truly believed in. But the truth wasn't buried with them. It was waiting, sealed inside the family crypt, beneath a slab of marble that was never meant to be lifted. In 1924, nearly a century after the last Beaumont heir was seen alive, a storm tore through Caroline County. The floodwaters swept through the old estates, exposing foundations long forgotten. Among them was a stone structure behind a thicket of oak, the Beaumont family crypt. Local boys found it first. They pried open the iron door, laughing, daring one another to step inside. But laughter turned to silence when they saw the carvings. Not crosses or names, faces. The entire chamber was lined with sculpted faces of women, their expressions frozen in anguish, and at the centre a single coffin stood, sealed not with nails, but with melted wax and the Beaumont family crest. A historian named James Morrow was summoned to document the find. He was a man obsessed with forgotten genealogies, the kind who believed that every myth began as truth. When he examined the coffin, he found something stranger than death, a child's rattle placed neatly on top of the lid and a lock of golden hair tied with silk ribbon. Morrow wrote in his field notes that night, "This is not a crypt, it's a confession." He tried to trace the Beaumont bloodline, but county birth records between 1830 and 1840 had all been altered, pages missing, names scratched out. Even the church registry had been burned in what was called a clerical fire. Only one entry remained legible: Clara Beaumont, union unblessed. Locals began to talk again. They said Clara had fallen pregnant, that her father tried to hide her away, that when she refused one of his arranged marriages, Elijah made sure no other man would ever touch her. The rest was left to rumour. Morrow stayed in town for months, collecting fragments, letters and whispers, but the more he learned, the sicker he became. His final note, written the night before he disappeared, read, "If blood built their fortune, then blood demanded payment, and the Beaumont debt is still being paid." When they found his body in the river 3 days later, his fingernails were black, as though he'd clawed at something underground. In the decades that followed, Beaumont Hall decayed into ruin. The once grand plantation house became a maze of rot, its windows boarded, its garden overtaken by ivy and serpents. Locals swore they could hear music from inside on humid nights, faint piano notes drifting through the swamp air. A state historian named Margaret Ellis visited the site in 1956 to photograph what was left of Virginia's antebellum architecture. But when she developed her film, something appeared that hadn't been there when she took the pictures. In one image, through the cracked window of the Great Hall, stood a young woman in a white dress. Her eyes were fixed directly on the lens. Margaret went back with a reporter a week later. The house was empty, but in the dust on the parlour floor they found footprints, small, bare, leading toward the basement door. And when they opened it, a stench like old blood filled the air. At the bottom of the stairs was a single wooden chair. Chains hung from the ceiling above it, and carved into the stone wall were words so faint they almost disappeared into the damp. Father said purity is our burden. Margaret published one article, only one. A month later she resigned from her position, moved across the country, and never spoke of the Beaumont estate again. By the 1970s, Beaumont Hall was gone. Locals said a fire took it. Others said the state quietly bulldozed it under the guise of land restoration, but nothing ever grew there again. Not grass, not moss, not even weeds, just clay, red as dried blood. In 2003, construction began on a new highway cutting straight through the old Beaumont property. Work halted after the first week when excavators unearthed a buried chamber, unrecorded on any map. Archaeologists assumed it was a slave quarters or root cellar until they found 6 child-sized coffins stacked neatly in the dirt. None bore names. Each was marked with a burned sigil, a circle crossed by 2 interlocking rings, the same symbol carved into Elijah Beaumont's cane, seen in surviving portraits. Forensic analysis dated the remains to the 1830s, the exact years Clara Beaumont was missing. And though DNA results were inconclusive, the coroner noted a disturbing detail. The children all shared unusual genetic similarities, closer than siblings should. The state quietly shut down the dig within 48 hours. The bones were removed, catalogued as miscellaneous historical remains, and sealed in the archives of Richmond University. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Paul Hendricks, later told a colleague that one of the skulls had been buried with its mouth sewn shut. When pressed, he said only one thing: they weren't buried, they were hidden. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Because the Beaumont curse didn't die with Elijah. In the late 2000s, descendants began appearing. People who didn't even know they were related. A woman in Georgia who discovered her grandmother's maiden name was Beaumont. A man in Kentucky whose DNA test showed a connection to a lost Virginia bloodline. Most ignored it until they started dreaming the same dream. A white house sinking into the earth. A voice whispering, "Blood built this place. Blood keeps it standing." One descendant, Lydia Hart, agreed to speak publicly. She said that after her test results came back, she began waking to find soil under her fingernails. Once she heard piano notes in her living room, the same melody recorded on Margaret Ellis's 1956 tape. A week later, she vanished. Her home was found locked from the inside. The only thing missing was her phone. And in its final recording, a whisper, "He's still here, he never left the hall." Modern genealogists tried to trace the Beaumonts, but every digital record hits a wall, an erased branch, a missing name, a lineage that loops back onto itself, as though the family never bred outward, only inward. DNA experts who examined samples from the Caroline County archives noted a genetic mutation so rare it's almost extinct, a condition once caused by centuries of closed inheritance. One doctor described it as a bloodline consuming itself. The deeper the investigation went, the more people backed away. One archivist resigned after finding her own last name, listed in a Beaumont marriage register from 1832. Another refused to continue cataloguing, saying she heard whispers whenever she opened the vault box. But a final clue surfaced. A letter written by Elijah himself, dated 2 months before Clara disappeared. The ink is faded, but the words are unmistakable. I have kept my house pure. No foreign seed will dilute us. The Lord takes what is impure and returns it to dust. That letter was never meant to be found. Today, nothing stands where Beaumont Hall once rose. The highway curves gently around the site, an unexplained detour that engineers still can't justify. But on foggy mornings, truckers swear their GPS flickers there, showing a phantom road that leads to nowhere. The official records end in 1835, but some say the Beaumont name still appears on property deeds across the South, hidden in middle names, buried in marriage licenses. The bloodline, perhaps, never ended. It just forgot itself. And every few decades, someone dreams the dream, the White House, the music, the soil beneath their nails. Some call it folklore. Others say it's a warning that sins of the flesh never truly die. They only sleep until called by name. So if you ever find yourself driving down Route 624 outside Caroline County, and you see a patch of ground where nothing grows, don't stop, because that land remembers. And the Beaumonts remember you.